Hello, hello. I'm so glad you're here. We are going to do a really cool drawing today um, of a mountainscape, like a ridge of mountains reflected in some water. And I've been playing around with different class formats for this class. And this time I figured maybe I'd try sort of a presentation style where there's slides that we can flip through. So it'll be 27 still images with me guiding you through them. You can see my little face here in the corner and talking you through what I've done for each step. So let me know how this format works, if it's helpful, if it kind of helps us move at the appropriate pace. I worry sometimes that the videos, you're probably pausing and starting and pausing and starting. So hopefully this solves that problem and you can really look carefully at what has happened in each step. So first off, I want to tell you about the materials you need. Pretty straightforward. A piece of paper, a pencil, and an eraser, and then two different weights of ink or marker or pen or something. So you can use a fine tip Sharpie and a normal Sharpie, or you'll see here I have a double pointed one. You can even use just like for your lighter weight, a ballpoint pen or a gel pen. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Okay, if you have art pens, then use two different weights of those. And then you're going to need a pair of scissors and a second sheet of paper. And I chose to use a black piece of paper here just so you could see the contrast against the white paper. But this second, it's going to be a stencil, the second piece of paper. And you want it to be about half as tall as your page and equally wide, turned in landscape format. So again, just about a half sheet of paper. You could even take a second sheet of paper and fold it in half. So what we're going to do is we're going to sketch out first. Now, again, I used a white pencil. Don't freak out. I just used white on black so you could see it in contrast to the white paper. But if with your project, you're going to be able to see it just fine. So get your second piece of white paper is fine. And with whatever pencil or pen, these aren't going to be finished lines. You won't see them. We're going to draw a mountain range. And we're going to do that by breaking this stencil paper into thirds across the length of the paper. So you'll see two little tick marks where I really roughly marked out a third of the length. And so on the 2/3 mark, right, on the right hand tick mark, I drew the tallest peak. Now it's just going to be a simple kind of wobbly triangle. Don't worry too much about it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be any, specific mountain range. We're going real sort of illustrative here. So that's going to be your tallest peak. That's what I drew first. And then on the left-hand tick mark, the third on the left, you're going to draw your second peak. And so those are sort of your placeholders, right? And then in between those two, you're going to draw three shorter peaks. And you'll see that, so I'm going to number them from left to right. So number 2, peak number 2, and peak number 5 are about the same height. And then you can make peak 1 and 3 approximately the same height and vary it however you want. Now, the only reason I'm talking about thirds is because there's something that our eye does in composition that really likes things divided into uneven numbers. So the rule of threes is really helpful. You'll see, like if you ever turn the grid layout on your iPhone when you're taking pictures, it's divided into thirds. And that is just a trick of composition. Things feel really static and sort of locked if you're dividing them in half or in even numbers. But if you go by thirds and uneven, it sort of gives it a little more dynamic, interesting feel. Okay, so we've got our mountains hopefully sketched out. Don't worry about the overlap or anything. Those are just, it's just extra. So you're going to cut out along the ridge line. And I know I just told you that composition doesn't like being in half, but for this, we are going to try to place the bottom of your stencil right along the half mark of your page, because that is going to be the line where, our eye thinks the mountains meet the water. And then what you're going to do is just trace over the ridge line, the shape of your mountains, with a pencil. Okay. And here, I actually don't mind if you use your thinner tip marker right away. Just get the shape of the marker or the shape of the mountains locked in there with marker. Okay, and then draw the straight edge on the bottom of where the mountains meet the water as well. If you do that in pencil, it's fine. Totally your choice. I did it in marker here. Now I want you to flip your stencil down, right? So you're not going to rotate it. You're going to flip it so that you're achieving the mirror image shape, and you're going to overlap it a little bit. So you're not going to put the bottom edge right alongside the line you've already drawn. You're going to push it up by just a little bit so that the shape we draw that's reflected in the water on the bottom is a little bit smaller. It's just going to give a little more visual weight to the actual mountains than the reflection. So here's what I've done. I scooted it up a little bit and then I traced it. And this time I do want you to do it in pencil, and you'll see why a little bit later. Okay, so see how we've got a mirror image shape of mountains on the top, mountains on the bottom by flipping over that stencil. Okay, so here's where I'm going to walk you through kind of detailed steps on how to get some texture and shape and shadow blocked into your mountains. So for each peak, from the very peak of the mountains, you're going to draw kind of a jaggedy line, and the specifics of it don't matter. That jagged line can be whatever shape you want. The only one that's going to touch the line you'll see is mountain number 4. Okay, the rest stop kind of a vague halfway down the mountain shape. So I started with doing this on the mountain itself, and then I copied those lines roughly, really roughly. It's not exact, on the reflection side of the paper. Okay, so let's be clear so my language makes sense. The mountain side is above the half line, and the reflection side is below the half line. Okay, so once you've got those jaggedy lines sketched in, and mountain number 4, the line reaches that intersection, what you are going to do is you're going to draw the right hand shoulder. So you're going to continue out the top line of the mountain. Let's see if I can get my hands in the camera. So the top line of the mountain makes a triangle, and you can't see that ridge line based on our first stencil tracing, right? So you're going to take on mountain number 1, mountain number 3, and mountain number 4. Okay, so follow me there. 1, 3, and 4. You're going to extend the top line of the mountain down until it intersects one of the jaggedy lines you drew previously. Okay, I hope this is making sense so far without seeing me do it in live time. So you're, just to say it one more time, I'm trying to say the same thing in a different way. On mountain 1, moving from left to right, mountain 3, and mountain 4, you're going to follow the top line of the mountain and keep going into the field of the mountains, like where our stencil was sitting. And you're going to keep drawing that line until it intersects the jaggedy line you drew down from the very top peak. Okay, so that's how I got kind of those triangular shapes. Now, the next thing we're going to do is on mountain 1 and 3, we're going to extend our lines to the left. So you'll see the jaggedy line I drew down from the peak of mountain 1. I then pushed out to the edge of the paper. And on mountain 3, I'm doing the same thing we did in the previous step, where I'm extending the top line, the ridge line of the mountain, until it intersects the jaggedy line of mountain 2. Okay, so I think that catches us up. Now, in both of these steps, the last step and this step, you can see the difference. I'm also repeating those lines really roughly in the reflection, remember? So it doesn't have to be exact. You'll even notice on my mountain 1, my reflection is way different, and it's okay. It does not matter. It's hard to get your brain to really copy exactly what it's done. It just has to somewhat reflect what you've done in the mountain shape. Okay, so the next step we're going to do is divide the sort of the right half of each mountain into these like woven shapes. So basically, I'm finding the little wobbles or the little corners in that jaggedy line I drew down from the peak, And I'm just going to use those as starting points to draw kind of drifty, weaving lines down and to the right. So you'll notice on mountain one, I drew, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, and some of them extend to the ridge line, some of them extend down to the horizon line, the joint between the mountains and the reflection. And it does not matter where these are, okay? You're going to just, you're basically dividing the right hand side of each mountain, like we divided it in half with that jaggedy line, and on the right face, you're just going to break it into these like swoopy triangle diamond shapes. The particulars do not matter. Trust me in that, okay? You can copy mine exactly if you want, but they just need to be sort of like 2 to 3 to 4 lines, maybe even one. On mountain 3, you'll see I did only one. On mountain 4, I did only one. So you're just kind of sweeping these down to meet the horizon line or the next jaggedy line or a ridge line, wherever they extend to naturally. And then I tried to mimic really generally those lines in my reflection side of the paper. Okay, so what I did here is I took my regular Sharpie or my thicker weight pen, and I just traced over all the lines on the top half of the paper. I want these to stand out, and we're going to go through and we're going to add more weight to some of these lines later. But for now, I just want you to block in all those lines on the top half mountain side of your paper with your heavier weight Sharpie. Now, you'll notice in the photo I put a sketchbook underneath my paper, and that is to protect my work surface. So just heads up, if you're using a Sharpie, not all paper is sturdy enough or thick enough to prevent it from bleeding through, and I don't want anyone to ruin their table in this project. Okay, so this is where it starts to really get fun, I think. What we're going to do now is take our finer weight marker or our pen, and we're going to draw lines that are generally parallel to the ridge line of each mountain. Now notice I'm favoring the right hand side of each mountain. We're not going to put any lines on the left side, okay? So the left side of each mountain is left white. Now, based on whatever lines you've drawn, your drawing might start looking somewhat different from mine. If you're following me exactly, it might look similar. But what I want you to do is make these lines not perfect. They're not like ruler straight. They're kind of wobbly. Sometimes I'll add little, shakes to my line on purpose. They're not super evenly spaced. Some of them, kiss each other and come really close, and some have a little gap. And that's what's going to give the shadow side of your mountain, the darker side, what we're filling in, a little bit of texture and interest. And my lines, again, are mimicking or following the slope of the ridge line, the top. Now, you'll see in this next slide that I filled in all the shapes, and the lines aren't necessarily parallel to the ridge line. They're parallel to the top line of that section. So does that make any sense? I'm not sure. The lines are going to generally follow the curve of the section they're in rather than the mountain overall. So that way we're guaranteeing that not all our lines are facing exactly the same way, but those sections that we drew in make the lines, generally they're the same angle, but they're going to change a little bit depending on which section they're in. Okay, so we've got that all filled in. We've got darker lines and then thinner lines filling the right side of the mountain, and we've got the left side left totally white. So that's the light side where the sun might be hitting the mountains. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is stick with my finer weight marker, and I'm going to start drawing some horizontal lines. Again, kind of wobbly if you want them. They don't have to be perfectly straight, but they're going to be sort of continuous, following that horizon line or the break line between the mountains and the reflection. And I'm just going to follow that line all the way across until I get to one of my sections that's being left white. So I'm just going to keep bringing my line down step by step, line by line. And then when I hit a place where in my mountain side, it's white, I'm going to mimic that on the reflection side, and I'm just going to stop my pen, pick it up, and then put it down again. Okay, so I wanted to show you a little close-in of what I mean by that. And I'm going to continue that until I've filled in all the shadowed sides of the mountains. Now you'll notice I didn't worry about the secondary sort of sections of each mountain. I just did horizontal lines all the way across, stopping at where the mountain stays white or the ridge line. We'll add some contours in later, don't worry. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is do kind of a wobbly, shaky line. It's going to be like a snaky line instead of a straight line, following the ridge line of each mountain. Because you'll notice here, those lines we have are pencil, and if we were to erase them, there would just be no break or border. I just went back a slide. Sorry if that was disorienting. But there will be no break or border between the sky and the mountain. So we want to add something in, but we're going to make it wobble, right? Because it's in the water, and we might see like ripples or sort of motion in the water, making the lines be sort of wobbly. So I just started with that, the ridge line of each, making them wobbly. And then I did the same thing, and I did not worry about my wobbly line sort of including or not including my straight lines in the water. So let me say that a different way. Like where I'm drawing a snaky line between the white side of my mountain in the reflection and my shadowed side of the mountain in the reflection, sometimes my horizontal lines, bump out beyond my shaky line I'm drawing now, and sometimes they don't. And it's okay. It's meant to be a little bit fuzzy and disorganized because it's in the water, right? So we're not seeing this crisp and clear in the air. It's reflected in the water. And then I'm going to do that generally, really roughly, with the sort of contour lines that I drew before as well. And those, I knew where they were because I, could kind of see my pencil line, but again, it's really vague. And so I am okay if I skip some or if they're slightly different. It's just the general idea of what we're seeing on the mountains being reflected in the water. Okay, so now I added a couple more lines along the horizon line. I just wanted to differentiate mountains versus water a little more. So I added some dark lines just to emphasize that. And then the next step was to add little sort of texture marks, is what we'll call them, on the white left-hand side of all the mountains. And you'll notice again, I'm following the angle of the ridge line, right? So all the little texture lines, which are just kind of dashes, dots, lines, group some of them together, leave some of them, spaced out a little more, kind of vary the density of them, and that'll add a lot more texture. And some of them can touch the center line of the mountain, and some of them can just be on the face. They don't have to extend all the way. Just make it kind of random and scattered on the white side, and it just adds a little bit of texture without adding shadow. And then we're going to mimic that on the water side, but instead of following the ridge line, again, we're following the horizon line so that it looks like the reflection in the water. Okay, just dashes and dots. Okay, so now along that horizon line, we're going to add some tiny little trees. Now, this isn't a realistic drawing. If it was, we'd probably have some hills and it'd be a little bit more varied in the shape. But I think this line of trees is really going to emphasize, again, the break between the mountains and the reflection. So what I did was just draw little vertical lines in varying heights, spaced unevenly, just really random. They can even feel super like squiggly and messy. Okay, messy is good here. Scattered along the horizon line all the way down, and this is so far just on the mountainside. And then what I did, and to clarify, I did this step with my thicker weight Sharpie. It's just a little quicker to fill in. You could achieve the same look with your thinner weight. It doesn't really matter, but I find it faster and to stay messy, to just fill in sort of the area around each of those little tree trunks that you drew. So don't draw the trees, just darken the tree line in. And that might sound silly to say or not make any sense, but I don't want you to spend time to try and draw each tiny little tree. The scale here is too small. So just scribble it. Just scribble in little tree shadows all along the horizon. And then what you're going to do is mimic those trees, but this time I do want you to use your fine tip marker. And rather than drawing vertical lines for trees, you're going to stay with the horizontal line pattern that we have on the water side and just kind of sketch in with little squiggles or horizontal lines the tallest trees so that it looks like they're kind of reflected in the water. And so there you have the finished tree line, darker on the top because I used my heavier weight Sharpie and I filled it in fully. And then on the water side, I just sketched in the little sort of horizontal ripple marks where each tree would be. And then I added some water ripples on the bottom just to emphasize that what we're seeing is not sky. It's not a double mountain range. It's flipped in the water. And so, believe it or not, you just completed this beautiful mountain drawing. Now, the last step that you can do that really sort of, I think, brings it home and seals the deal is to darken the very top ridge line of all the mountains. So you'll see how, I don't even know where I did it. Between this slide and that slide, I added a darkness, just a little bit of thickness to the whole ridge line across the whole mountainscape on the upper half of your paper. And that just really helps your eye know, okay, we're looking at a mountain range, here it is. And I didn't do it in the water because I want the mountains to sort of fade into the reflection, whereas against the sky, I think it looks really nice to have it stand out. So there you have it. You made a lovely reflection drawing. This would be a really fun drawing if you want to try again to do on like craft brown paper or sort of a gray tone paper and do the upper half mountain drawing in black pen like we did, and then do all the reflections in like a white gel pen or even with white crayon or something. Could look really cool. Use the same strategy, same steps, but black lines for the mountain, white lines for the reflection. That would show up on the brown or gray paper really well. So try it a few different ways. Let me know how it goes. Let me know how this class recording format went, like if you can pause it and flip back and forth between slides more easily, or if you, I guess you haven't seen them from the last session, but if you think a live video with motion, seeing me actually do the drawings would help. I want this to serve you well. I hope you had fun. I hope you enjoy all the lessons in the session this week, and I look forward to hearing from you. And if I don't, I will see you next Sunday. Okay, have a good one.